All right, Sara Goo, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
So you've been a reporter, you've held leadership positions at Axios and NPR and Pew Research Group and the Washington Post, and you're the author of Kuleana. Did I pronounce that correct?
Yeah, good
Yeah.
job.
A story of family, land, and legacy in old Hawaii. Because it is high school graduation season, is this exactly what you had planned when you were graduating high school to do all those things?
Actually, I was one of those kids who knew exactly what I wanted to do when I grew up. Journalism was on my mind and my singular focus. I was on the high school yearbook, and so I knew I wanted to do something in journalism for the rest of my life. So I was pretty nerdy about it. So I don't know that I knew I was going to write a book, but definitely it was my passion, journalism for sure.
Was it what you expected? Sometimes in the high school version of something ends up being kind of different than what people expect, and so they shy away from it. But was it what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think that the career of doing, the mission of journalism has definitely been what I thought it would be, which is, the idea of just telling stories that would empower people with information to, help them make decisions about their lives, I think has been for the most part what I thought it would be and has paid off. This could be a whole other separate podcast, but I think I don't think the public values journalism, or maybe journalism hasn't done its job perhaps as well as the media business in general has just turned out to be pretty tumultuous and difficult. So I think breaking through to getting to people to provide factual information has been really hard in the last several years in particular. And so that struggle has been really challenging and therefore less satisfying, I would say. So anyway, that's a whole separate podcast.
Yeah.
But I mean, doing it when it's well done, that part of it, I really enjoy.
Mhm.
It's a mission worthwhile, of course.
So speaking of mission, your book was a bit of a mission into some family history, and you think it's really important. Well, it is really important to go back into the history and find a generation. You were able to find that your land was given to an ancestor, or land was given to an ancestor of yours 175 years ago. Pretty incredible. What did finding out those details mean to you, and how has it impacted how you've gone forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I didn't set out to really write about myself or my family. I think that as somebody who's part Native Hawaiian and, grew up with those roots, I think I really always wanted to write a story that really just kind of told a truer story about Hawaii. I feel like its narrative is, to me, always felt, at least from the American perspective, felt very too simple, to one note, and, false, to be honest. I think most Americans know Hawaii as this bucket list vacation spot, this beautiful place, which it is, or they know Pearl Harbor, and that's literally it. And to me, as someone who has a lot of family there, I really feel like there's a deeper, more beautiful, culturally rich story and kind of the deeper history of the indigenous people of Hawaii and, the story, frankly, of colonization of Hawaii. It's the only state that used to be an independent nation. I don't even think a lot of people have probed that or know that in this country, despite it being the most recent, part of the United States is something kind of astonishing to me. And so I really wanted to tell just a richer, truer story, a different narrative about Hawaii that I felt deserved to be told. And so this story about my own family became just a vehicle to do that.
Mm.
And so I kind of turned my reporting, to my own family to be able to flesh that out. And to be honest, it was kind of a surprise. I didn't really expect to do that. I really kind of set out early on to just, tell a more, rich, honest narrative. But, family events in my family kind of overtook the narrative, so to speak. And I realized that that was maybe a better vehicle to do it. So that ended up being the case.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed highly relatable, even though it was specific to your family, because I think a lot of people that story resonates with a lot of people at different elements of that. You wrote that there's a difference between heritage and identity, which I really like. Can you explain a little bit further about the difference there?
Yeah, and I'd love to, I think, like, Alaska and Hawaii probably do have a lot in common, and, for me, the issue I explore other than, like, trying to hold on to our family's land was really also the idea of, my own identity and my own family's history as someone who lives now, far away from Hawaii. I live in Washington, D.C. As you talked about, I'm in the news business. I'm raising my children far away from that place. And so I think it was really about like, there's a difference between, how we're born, what our family story is, and then also how we choose to continue on the story of our family and our own identity and pass that on. And I think that, as we in this country, we're increasingly, meeting and pairing up and partnering with people from different cultures. I think that it wasn't until I was raising my own children that I realized that, it takes a lot of intention to, explore that, what we really want to pass on, to that next generation. And I think that our culture's so focused, our American culture is so focused on the me, the right now, and the me culture. It's all about, what do I want right now? And it's very, that capitalist culture just so focuses on the self, and I think that the Hawaiian culture, at least, and I think a lot of indigenous cultures really focus on that generational responsibility, that kind of what do we owe those who come before us and what do we owe those who come after us? And I think particularly when, you have a culture that's so connected to the land and the environment around you, you can't help but have that sense of responsibility. And that's the name of my book is Kuleana, which translates to responsibility. And it's really not even just responsibility in the American sense of the word, like the burden of things you have to do, but it really, in a Hawaiian understanding of it, is really about a generational responsibility. And I think that hopefully that is a word that, transcends culture.
Mhm. And living in Southeast Alaska on Prince of Wales Island, it was probably about 70 or so percent native when my family moved up. So my brother and I were the only blonde kids in the school. But we just saw that there was the rich culture and there was native language in the schools and there was native art class. And it was really important to see, or really informative to see, and educational to see how they respected the elders and being stewards of the land. And so when I went to college in Arizona, I really identified as, Southeast Alaskan. So I'm not indigenous to that area, but it's just when you're around people who cherish the land and have those important values, it's really reassuring. And so I found myself really missing Alaska when I wasn't there. So even when I wasn't there, graduate college, I started teaching in California. I just really longed for Alaska, and I felt really at home when I would go back there during the summers. And it's really, really important to have that. If you're untethered to like a land, then it's pretty tough.
Yeah, and I think the word stewardship is a really important word to understand. I think that, my book is a lot about this journey of like the our family land that we inherited faced this property tax increase of 500% in 1 year. And so we're really forced to deal with this crisis. And so it's about like the crisis of, real estate and what to do about it. But really, it's about Kuleana and it's about this, real responsibility and, that was handed down to us about stewardship. And that's very, very different understanding of the care and honor actually of our connection to a place. And I think an island is a particularly unique people of islands particularly understand that because your livelihood and your ability to exist is so dependent on that. And so that is something really special, and I think is a totally different understanding of our relationship to land. And it's not even just land; it's like water. It's
Mm, right.
streams and waterways and all the other places where life exists. And so I think that that context in which we live is just so essential to understand and appreciate,
Mm,
right? And it's a very different way of going through the world.
mm. So that land that you had, or the family still has, it's surrounded by land that's owned by like very, very wealthy people. So was the tax increase just a way of getting more money from these wealthy people from the lower 48 or from the mainland who've gobbled it up? Or like what was the reasoning behind the severe tax increase?
Yeah, I think, a couple reasons. I think, Hawaii is a place where, land, property has values have gone up exponentially, perhaps faster than some other parts of the United States. And that's because one, the island nature of it, there's finite amount of real estate. And number two, it's highly desirable and the world's billionaires can buy it up. It's a place where, a third of the property taxes are paid by people who don't live there. And so that just leaves a lot less property for local people to live and creates incredible pressure there. And it also raises the value of the rest of the all of the property up and then the tax levels for everybody. So what had happened after my grandparents passed is I think, you know, that just went up without explanation for us. And we had to kind of consider our options about like whether to kind of reclassify the zoning of it or whether to build this property on it and maybe like rent out, build something and rent it out. And none of those sounded really attractive to us. But we did know that one thing we wanted to do was hold on to it. But, to be honest, the point really was that this is not a unique story for Native Hawaiian families. And if you have met any Native Hawaiian family, every family has a story like this of like property they have lost for this reason or forced to sell for similar reasons, either this generation or previous generations. And it's not just Native Hawaiians, it's local people,
Mhm.
who have had land in the family. And it's a crisis, right? There's a, ripple effect that's happening to today of displacement of local people, of indigenous people. So there's more Native Hawaiians now that live outside of Hawaii. And there's a crisis like writ large for the islands where there's a shortage of doctors, a shortage of teachers. They literally fly in teachers from the Philippines to
Mhm.
teach in the
Yeah,
schools.
we've had that too.
Yeah, and so it's like, where is this going? At some point, it's not I'd say now it's not sustainable. It's an untenable situation. And so, I don't live in Hawaii currently, but I think that there's a lot of policy things they have to sort out there and there are some, measures that they're considering to do around housing, affordability, cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. But, they're fundamentally you have to have balance, or the Hawaiian word for it is pono. You have to have like this sense of who is this land for? It has to serve at the end of the day the people who live here.
Mhm.
And, it has to serve local people. And if it doesn't work for anyone,
Yeah.
right? It can't just be a place for visitors.
Yeah.
So so, I don't remember what your question was, but but I mean, I think that the issues that Hawaii is dealing with, I think are familiar to a lot of other places in our country and around the world that are trying to find this balance and finding themselves completely out of whack
Mhm.
because it's really like a wealth inequality issue. It's really about, a land and resources inequality issue. And it's really about like, rethinking, how we're dividing up, and what we value at the end of the
Mhm.
day, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, here in Ketchikan, we're gonna have 1.6 million visitors this summer, and the town of Ketchikan's got about 10,000 people. Tomorrow alone, we're gonna have 16,000 people off cruise ships. So
Yeah,
and that's such a massive part of the economy, and so if we want what we have as far as infrastructure, if we want that we don't have a state income tax, we don't have a state sales tax. So locally, we need it's tourism or nothing, but also what comes along with that. More people they come up here and they see it, and so they want a chunk of it for themselves, and so they buy
exactly.
their summer home. And Airbnb was kind of non-existent about 5 years ago, but it's all over the place now, post COVID, and it's Southeast Alaska is of course. There's a ton of land. We have Tongass National Forest, and there's Native Corporation land and Village Corporation land and state land, but you do feel that squeeze, and it is tough to reconcile going forward because you don't want to disincentivize people making products that we use, but also is it undermining our experience, and then the locals suffer. So I don't know how we deal with that. Have you come up with anything?
Well, yeah, I think you can look at the mistakes Hawaii has made well
Mm,
ahead of you, which is, become too dependent on it,
mm,
It's like more than, like 80 to 90% of the economy. And when that becomes your crutch, then you don't have a whole lot of options. So I think diversification is key. Yeah, and I think that Hawaii feels in particular like they can't stop the planes from coming.
mm,
And so, yeah, so you're beholden to that power, that money that comes along with it.
mm,
And then, those are the people who build your infrastructure and those are the people who pay the jobs, make the jobs and, make everything else happen.
mm.
So that becomes a very formidable, force to reckon with in the long run.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but I think, there's probably other versions of that. I know in Alaska's economy for sure from what little I know.
Mhm. So as you're researching this, it has to be kind of disheartening and depressing. So how did you continue along the story to tell the story, but also just not feel overwhelmed with despair with the taxes and with the inevitabilities? Like, how do you manage to continue to tell the story? And
Yeah.
that's something that, as a journalist, those things happen.
It wasn't all bad news. I mean, I think there is a lot of joy in like I did meet a ton of family members that I didn't know before. And I think there was a lot of joy and discovery. Yeah, a lover of history. I love genealogy. It took me down all kinds of really fun research paths to, I think line up your own family's history to American history, just the history of, events of big moments in time and see yourself in it and see your family in it is really exciting and where they stood in that moment and, their part in it. So that was exciting. And also to see your family story check out,
Mm,
I mean, my grandmother, would take me to our family land and say, Sarah, land was given to us from the king, and it was once from the mountain to the sea. And I knew that my grandmother had 10 acres of this land. And as a young child, I would say, like, I wonder if grandma's story is true, and then to find later after she died, like the actual records handwritten from the king Kamehameha III and find that actually the original grant was 990 acres. And to be able to tell the story of how did 990 acres become 10 acres
mm,
and that the story of our family was the story of the Hawaiian people. And that's powerful, and that's a story that deserves to be told. It's a sad story, but it's a true story.
mhm.
And, it's an indigenous story and it's an American story. So we should tell that story and it should be, so that's my job. I'm a storyteller and, sad story, true story. I mean, that's what journalists tell all the time.
Right.
So that's, I to me, it was also gratifying to know the stories my grandmother told me. I also could verify and hear the same stories from my great uncles and my great aunts I never met until, 5 years ago. And that was really lovely to hear that their kupuna told them the same stories that they were passing down to me. So that was really lovely too. And also to hear that they were really proud to support this book and share the story. And, look, and in the end, I think like it brought a lot of generations together.
Mm,
Sometimes in a crisis, you're forced to act and you're forced to make hard choices. And in our family's case, like you often hear of an inheritance or tearing families apart or,
right.
or a decision around an inheritance doing that. In our case, it rallied us together. So I think that there are some moments to celebrate at the end of this story.
I think one of my favorite images was the artifacts that were wrapped in the newspaper and then put in the Costco box, and how at the time it was probably like something neat that should be saved, but now at this point, since time has passed, those are like priceless things. So, what was something that you like a detail that you loved the most, like your favorite part of the book?
Good question. I think that was one of my favorite parts is I think, I think there are a lot of pieces of Hawaiian history that just kind of were what they call chicken skin moments that just were exciting moments to discover. Another moment was I knew that my great grandmother, her first language was Hawaiian. And it's a language that I never learn to speak. I grew up in Southern California, but I discovered someone sent me an audio recording of her. She did an interview on the radio in the 1970s, and I popped it in. It was like on a CD-ROM or a CD, and I popped it into my Mac computer. And hearing her voice speaking Hawaiian was like the most exciting, thrilling, goosebump moment for me. And it was so beautiful. It was like listening to someone singing a lullaby to
Mm,
me, and I feel like I connected to this woman I'd never met, and I thought, "Wow, what a treasure to hear someone speak a language that almost died off the face of this earth, and some miracle, has come back and is now being spoken and, taught in immersion schools all over Hawaii." What an amazing feat that is, and I think that's very inspiring.
mhm. What did family members say when you approached them about not only just researching this, but also writing about it? Were they excited about it because your journalistic credentials, or were they worried that the family, I don't want to say laundry was going to be aired? Like, what was that like?
Well, I mean, no family's perfect, right? I think there was some trepidation about what I was going to write just because I wasn't, familiar to everybody and I had to really introduce myself and I think earn a lot of trust. But one downside of taking so long to write a book is that it allowed me to spend a lot of time to get to know everybody and really spend a lot of time interviewing as many people as I could. And so, this book was a real labor of love, like a lot of books are. And I know you're an author too. So, over that time, I think allowed me to tell everybody what I wanted to do, why I wanted to do it, and they came to understand, that reasoning and get to know me most importantly, and my intentions. And so by the time the book came out, it wasn't a surprise, and everyone got to read it well ahead of time. So I think, there was always family tension, but I really tried to focus the book on, what does the reader need to know about the story and why? And, it's not a chronicling of every single thing that went down, but really what matters most to the story.
Hmm. What about the kids? You wrote about the hula experiences, and as I'm reading that, I have a toddler, and she's almost 20, 20 or almost 2 years. And I'm so afraid of those moments where she's super cute right now, just impossibly cute. But
Mhm.
once she gets to the point where she like is going to be, that I'm going to be an embarrassment, or I'm going to do something that she's not going to want to do, or it's a potential connecting point, or like, what if she doesn't love fishing? What about writing about the kids, and how did have they read it? Have they shared the book? Do you give the book to their friends? How's that gone?
Yes, they have. They're very. I think that my daughter Chloe in particular is, I wrote something that wasn't totally flattering, I think, about her not fully embracing, a moment when I made a lei for her and she didn't want to wear it. So it was kind of a heartbreaking moment for me as a parent. But I think that she understood the story and why I shared it. And I also wrote another redeeming moment for her. so, but I think that they understood that I needed to write an honest story, and that was part of the journey. And they're really proud. They came along to all the book tour visits with me. And I think that they also saw, more importantly, how readers connected to the story and how much it meant to them. And I think that that was important for them to see how much people felt like it touched them and it was meaningful to them. And I think that mattered a lot. So they're super proud. They gave me all kinds of tips about how I could do better on my Instagram, but
Oh, yeah, yeah, the
that's just,
techies.
which was just true, 100% true. But, they're teenagers. So yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. The COVID and the smartphones, it's just making everything so much different. Are you concerned about going forward? Or how did you parent through all of that? Give me some
Through
tips.
COVID? I was the worst. I was the worst parent because I was, like, running a news organization and, like, just throwing food out and hoping that they were eating and giving them money and telling them to, like, ride their bikes down the street and, like, go to the local corner store and buy whatever chips and ice cream they could eat. That's literally how I parented. It was really, really terrible.
Mm,
But they grew very independent, which I think is somewhat maybe redeeming. I'm not sure. Yes, I think I was running a news organization and writing a book at the same time. I don't recommend that at
Mm.
all.
Yeah. Well, you're on the other side of it now. It's one of those things that, it's super
Yeah,
cheesy, but, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
something
Um,
like that. I don't think I slept very well, and I have
well, that
definitely more
was
wrinkles.
you mentioned there was a couple things that coincided, at the same time, and that was, it was a time that it was really important to be a journalist and tell the stories. There were so many things going on in addition to COVID that it was just if we did not have journalists who were willing to write the truth in those times, and it was hard to know what was true and what wasn't, or this was like a mostly truth, and or this is what we know at this point, which could change in a week, and that is inherently journalism. But all the
Yeah.
negativity was amplified so much. What a difficult time to be a journalist at that point.
Yes, I mean, I think what's been the hardest thing has been, protecting journalists, frankly, and online personal safety as well as physical safety. I used to 10 years ago worry about that for my journalists overseas, and now I worry about it all the time for journalists in this country. And that's really sad state of affairs. So, yeah, that's the truth, and, I wish that we could just only have to worry about journalists just doing their job,
Mhm.
but unfortunately, we're not in that environment anymore. So,
I was at the student paper in college, and I loved just the heat that was put off by the environment. It was just fun to be around different people with different ideas, and I never got that. Do some freelance writing, but I'm never going into the paper to do any sort of writing. I just send it in, and I definitely miss that, or I wish I would have had that sort of experience. But it sounds
yeah.
like the sun has kind of set it on that with everything that's going on, and then of course with newspapers having to go online or shift or change
Yeah.
or reevaluate.
Well, it still exists for sure. I mean, I think there's a lot more remote work, but there's a lot of still creative collaboration. There's still a lot of snarkiness and that newsroom sensibility, it's still very much alive and well. A lot of gallows humor keeps us going for sure. And, there is still a lot of, collaboration every day to day, working together. It just looks differently, than it used to. And jobs have changed, the way that people work. But but yeah, I think that the culture definitely is very similar.
Mm. What's this creator economy venture you have with the Washington Post?
Yeah, good. Thanks for asking. So I, have been really interested in, just the changes that are happening to media. And, a lot more journalists are going independent. A lot of us are getting our information from independent creators. And to me, it's kind of like going more directly to the source, to independent, experts who are able to just publish on all kinds of platforms, whether that's Substack or, Instagram or YouTube. And so what I'm building is like a network of independent creators who are really about especially creators who are creating content around their subject matter expertise. So not, necessarily like beauty influencers, but really like experts in areas like, personal finance and, doctors and health and wellness and things like that. I'm not focused on kind of like hard news creators because we have that in the newsroom, but building this network, to help, them grow audience, to help them build like an ad network that we can tap and help support them because we have an ad network through the Washington Post. And so the idea is to, tap into their audience, that we don't have at the Washington Post. It's online through social and, so do the vetting and the fact checking for them and partner with them to create content. And so, it's really about like kind of being smart about leveraging the audience and the reach that they have, in a smarter way and being realistic about like where people are getting their information and helping to make sure that, they're getting high quality information, whether that's from a creator, a subject matter expert, or from our journalists.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's really fun. It's very entrepreneurial. It's very fun. It's very different. And we're just getting started. We've launched a couple shows with different creators, and we're launching a new social video series with a different creator every month.
Nice. Yeah, it seems like things kinda got Wild West for a little bit, and now do you think things are gonna shift back to more of a a trusted news organization rather than random person reporting whatever that they think that they're reporting, or the influencer type journalism? You think it's going to be, well, actually, I wouldn't even call it, it's not influencer journalism, it's influencer
Yeah.
stuff. Do you think we're headed for a beneficial correction?
I think it's still the Wild West. I that's the thing. I mean, anybody can publish, anybody can start a podcast, anybody can start a Substack. I mean, I think the question is like, I think what we're trying to do is like create like a bit of a signal like that these folks are part of a network that is fact checked, that is verified, and there's some kind of verification system that you can trust. And there's like a badge that
Mm,
you can see that these are, different from the rest. Because right now that doesn't really exist. You have to, as a consumer, spend a lot of time and see like, who is this person and can
right.
I trust them? And that's a lot of it's exhausting, frankly, because without that, you just have to go on like, what do I think? But until then, I think people are going to just self-select, right? They're going to have to choose like, do I like this journalist? Do I like this historian? Do I, subscribe? Do I want to pay? And that's very overwhelming. And I don't know, people, have curated their own media diet. Some of that's going to be traditional media, some of that's going to be individuals. And I think that that's going to continue, honestly. But I do think at some point, you know, I think that a network of trusted creators plus traditional media makes a whole lot more sense and would help both advertisers and consumers sort through it much easier.
Mhm,
That's my at least my value proposition.
mhm. As a journalism teacher, I'm a little bit worried about usages of AI. Do you think AI is gonna be an effective tool? Is it gonna erode journalism further? Where are you at with AI?
Yeah, well, AI right now is doing one thing, which is quickly eating into the bottom line of a lot of traditional media because it's killing search
Mm,
and referral links directly to news organizations as sources of information because it's creating these AI summaries, right? So, you ask a question, you want to find information about what's happening, and instead of like telling you to link to the Washington Post or the New York Times, it's just answering an AI summary with an AI summary, which may or may not be true,
right.
right? And so that is immediately leading to a lot fewer people going directly to a source or a news source in particular. So that is for now the big problem. And there's no kind of replacement for that. So that affects, the business model that has really driven a lot of traffic to news. In terms of content, that also is replacing some of the content. And so I think newsrooms are trying to figure out like, how do we use AI to produce content, more quickly that is accurate? Is that even possible? Maybe it's possible in terms of like on the production side of organizing our material of, in a way that can be fact checked. But, journalists are very, very wary of that, of course, for good reason. And so, I think that there's a lot of nervousness around that and I guess wanting to make sure that it's done responsibly. So it's there's constant, I would say, experimentation going on. I think but with a lot of, concern about making sure that it's responsible.
Yeah, it's hard to tell what the future is gonna look like because you have people who are hyping AI in order to make money, and then
Mhm.
people are saying they're overhyping it, and so it's not gonna be able to do that or can't do that. So what is it? Is it going to take over? Is it gonna be an apocalypse? Is it not? Like, it's so hard to tell what's going on here, and yeah, I
It
try to tell my students to be resourceful and, like, don't use it to erode your skills, or you have to develop the skills first. But also, if the future is
Yeah.
going to be, we're going to have to incorporate AI, then what's my duty to instruct them on appropriate use without just giving them the shortcut? It's a really
Yeah.
confusing time to
I
be a
mean,
teacher.
of course, there's other uses for reporting that are incredibly helpful using AI, right? You can do data analysis like
Mm,
so much faster for reporting, for investigative reporting. And we've used that and been able to review documents, for example, much, much faster. So, of course, like there are incredible uses for it, any like large, task of document search and document review that can be very helpful. So I think, there's two sides of this coin that we're all trying to understand at the same time. and, kind of do no evil
Mhm.
I think still applies here when we talk about technology. But it is evolving so fast, it just feels very overwhelming, and I think it just adds to, like, all the other changes that are happening to media all at the same time,
Mhm.
and particularly our business. So and particularly in Washington when every day is a new crazy day.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
you have primarily a leadership role. Are you still doing a lot of writing outside of the
Frankly,
book, obviously?
I'm not doing a ton of writing. I When I do writing, it's really like I like to I'm still focused on my book. My paperback comes out next month, actually in a few weeks. So the paperback version of the book comes out. So I still want to write and am engaged in like the topic related to Kuleana. So that's where my writing is focused, and I am thinking about some ideas for a future book following this. But and the but my and I'm also kind of interested in, like, political issues, like some of the things we talked about, or themes related to the book, just because I think that they're really important. But I haven't had time to do much writing beyond that. I've written some things around creator stuff in the media business too. So those are my 2 big lanes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It has been fun to kind of watch how your career has evolved and developed, or is there a part of you that kind of wants to go back to those first days of just, finding the story news hound stuff and not be an administrator, not be top of the food chain?
Well, I didn't set out to be like, a boss, I guess, but I think that what drives my interest here is I really want to see journalism thrive and survive, and that requires figuring out a new business model for it. And frankly, I'll just be honest with you, I didn't see the business side figuring that out quite well
Mhm.
at different companies I work for. And I think that my last job at Axios was really exciting to be at a startup that where, you could just build something from scratch was that was completely new was really fun and innovative. And I think that, this is a business that every 5 years gets totally disrupted. So we need the fourth estate in this country. We need to hold powerful people to account, and we need underpinning that a business model that is going to ensure that journalists have jobs. And right now, what I've seen in the last 25 years of my career is that every year, fewer journalists have jobs.
Mm.
So that is a problem I'm committed to solving. That requires me to, lead in some capacity to make sure that I can at least do what I can.
Mhm.
So I do love telling stories, and so I feel like the book and other projects allow me to do that. But, I'm increasingly more interested in, tackling the business side to solve that.
Mhm. What would you say to someone who's thinking about getting into journalism? Like, if you're going to talk to my high school seniors who are about ready to graduate and are contemplating a career in journalism, what skills would you recommend they have or develop, and then what path or avenue would you recommend?
Good question. I'm always so glad to hear that there are still students who want to be journalists and there's still a passion for that. And I guess I would recommend a couple things. One is, you know, pursue all, possible avenues and experiences and skills you can build to tell stories in all possible ways. I started my career saying like I'm going to be a writer and a newspaper reporter and that's it. I didn't want to do TV, I didn't want to do anything else. But that's just not possible. I think that you have to be able to tell a story, write a story. Writing is the fundamentals. So you have to have strong writing, but you also have to be able to like do an Instagram story. You have to be able to do a TV hit. You have to be able to think about sound. You have to be able to do an interview really well. You have to study people and the best people in each of these formats and how they do it. And that's how kind of I learned is like really watching the best of the best and breaking down and saying, why was that interview so effective? Why was that story done so well? What makes this graphic so good? Why was that video only 60 seconds or 30 seconds, but what it was so viral? What made it? Like that's not an accident. None of those things are just luck. They're they're crafts and they if the best journalists are students who are constantly learning. And so that's my best advice is study the people who are the best at it because you always have something to learn and also be on your toes. Like this business is constantly changing. So always kind of see if you can anticipate what's coming next.
Mhm. Before we close up here, any other thoughts about journalism? And then I'll ask you any other closing thoughts about the book. So, the thoughts about journalism?
Journalism is not for the faint of heart. Do not get into this business if you aspire to be rich or if you aspire to, if you're sensitive with, people saying bad things about you, or you have to be really tough in this business, both in terms of, you know, being brave and being bold with, the kinds of stories you want to tell and being resilient in going through, a business that isn't always kind financially.
Mhm.
So that's not for all of us. And so I think even if you don't do it forever, know that it's still worthwhile if you're up for that.
Mhm.
It is incredibly satisfying and it'll probably be the most satisfying thing you do. So
What about add about the book?
about the book, I don't, I guess, I would say the book is the most satisfying thing I've ever written, most satisfying story I've ever written, just because I've written, I don't know, hundreds of stories and with every story, I'm hoping to the reader finds value or the viewer finds value in it. And, this one is some stories are more important than others, right? And so I'm hoping that this is one book on the shelf that changes a narrative.
Mhm. Where can people find it? Where can people buy it? Do you have your own Instagram? Are you developing your Instagram skills so you have a
I
social media
I am,
presence?
but I'm not good at it.
Mm.
Yes, you can find me at saragoo.author on Instagram. But the book you can find on Amazon, you can find it bookshop for local independent bookstores. You can find it on Libby with your local library. You can find the audiobook. I feel like a ton of people I read the audiobook myself, so I recorded the audiobook myself. So you can if you want to listen to my voice for 7 hours or you may not, but I know a lot of people like to consume books that way. So I enjoy doing that. That's also on Amazon or wherever you can do audio FM is another place you can do the audiobook. So anyway, anywhere
Mm.
books are sold, Barnes and Noble, Target, anywhere you can buy them. You can buy the book
Mm.
online. So hope
When
you enjoy it, and I'd love to hear what you think.
It was great. I really enjoyed it. I did listen to it because it takes a little bit for Amazon to get books up here. When you were reading it, were you kinda editing in your head too? Like, you're reading a line, like, "Ah, man, I should change that. I should how can I have written that?" Like, how long did that take to actually
Oh
record?
my gosh. It took like a week. It's a fascinating process because I had like a producer in my ear who would, it's kind of like acting. That's the part I didn't anticipate. And I'm not very good at that. And so she would say, like, Sarah, read that again, but like with more feeling. And I
Wow.
would be like, oh my God. Okay. So, you have to read dialogue and be like, different people in your book. And so that was that was more challenging, I would say, but it was also fun.
Mhm.
But I'm not a voice actor, clearly, as you know, Jeff. So
Yeah, that's a great thing about the audibles is listening to the books. If they're read well, it creates such richer experience. Some
yeah.
books you can't be doing chores while you're listening to them, especially with like fiction. You kind of
Oh,
need to.
really? I haven't done a lot of audiobooks, but
Yeah,
do
I
you
have
prefer it?
I have a short commute, but if I'm going on hikes or something like that, or in the morning, just or
Mm.
doing yard work, things like that, I like listening to books or podcasts. But yeah, because it's just mundane work, so you don't have to be think about anything, so you can just really focus on your sense of hearing and the way it's read. Really is fantastic. I don't know if I can really say that I read it, but I did consume it, and you took what needed to, and it's a cool tool, and I really like it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've had people say, "I love your book," and I would fall asleep to listening to it. I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
well, I'm
it's
not sure if
terrible.
that's a compliment, but
I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm not sure. I
I'm
won't
not sure
ask
that's what
anything
I was
else.
intending." Yes.
Yeah.
No. Well, thank you for your interest. I hope that folks listening find this conversation interesting and relatable for Alaska. I'm a fan of Alaska, only been there once, but I know it's so beautiful and that the life is so unique and I love the people.
Mm.
So
Were you up
anyway.
here for a story or for a cruise?
Actually, I was there with NPR when I worked there. So
Okay.
I visited a local station in Juneau
Okay.
and Anchorage.
Nice.
So it was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, you coming into Juneau, it's unlike anywhere else. There's the glacier
Oh,
right
yeah.
there.
That
It's
flight,
just
very
it's
cool.
right
Yeah.
right there. Yeah, it's awesome. But well, thanks for taking some time and staying up late on the East Coast.
Anytime. Take care. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening. Please like and share. If you found today's conversation useful, you can go deeper with my writing on Substack. That's where I expand on these ideas from the show, share essays, reporting, and things I'm thinking about in real time. You can find it at From the 49th on Substack. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.